Hey there, I'm Ari from the Tech Buyers Guru, and I've got a really special video for you here on the channel today. This is my 2020 AMD Ryzen gaming PC assembly guide. I'm going to be taking all the components you see here in front of you here on the bench, and I'm going to be assembling them on camera so you get to know what it's like to build a really great gaming PC today in 2020 with modern components, a modern case, modern power supply, all the latest gear for 2020. Now, I want to thank my sponsors, Corsair, MSI, and Arctic. They provided a lot of great gear, and in particular, Corsair and Arctic came through with some awesome white components. I wanted to do a white-on-white build this year because I actually posted a video last year about some great Corsair components, some of which are on this table, that are all in white, and people were really excited about that, and I decided, well, why don't I go ahead and do a white build and show you what it's like and how it differs so much in terms of looks. I think it really looks a lot more premium than your typical black build, but we'll see soon enough. I'm going to go through the components here on the bench just so you know what's going into the system. First off, this is the Corsair iQ465X RGB case. This is an awesome case that was released late in 2019. It does have 3 RGB fans in front, plus an RGB controller. And I think it looks really, really great in white. So I'm excited to be using this case. Next up, the Arctic Freezer 34 Duo. This is hot off the assembly line. Arctic got this to me as soon as it was available in the US. This is a white-on-white version. It's a special edition. The Freezer 34 Duo has been around a while, but this is that special color scheme, and I think it looks awesome. And I believe it's the only white-on-white tower cooler available on the market today. So I'm excited to be able to feature this in the build. Moving on, we've got an RM850X white power supply from Corsair. That's a gold rated, fully modular power supply. I believe that's actually their only white model. And to go with it, we have their white PSU cable kit. This is an awesome accessory from Corsair. I'm going to actually highlight another really, really cool accessory from Corsair. This is one that's really, really hard to find. You can't buy this at retail. You can only buy this on the Corsair site, but I actually featured this in a video last year from CES 2019 when they released it. This is their white front panel extension kit. So all those front panel cables, like your USB cables and your audio cables, that typically look they kind of stick out inside of a build, particularly if you're using a white case. Well, these white cables will look a lot better inside. So you just attach these to your existing cables and bring them through inside the case, and I think it'll make the case look a lot better. The interior of that main compartment will look super slick. These are only available direct from Corsair. Thanks to Corsair for providing those. Also, of course, we have Corsair RAM, the Vengeance RGB Pro in white. That's a DDR4 3200 kit, 16 gigabytes. And then we have the MP600. Look, I'll be honest, I just had to have this in the system. No, it's not white. No, it doesn't really necessarily need to be in a system like this, but it's their Gen 4 PCIe drive, and it's super awesome, super fast, hits 5,000 megabytes per second sequential speeds. Thanks to the X570 motherboard I'm using from MSI. Thank you very much, MSI, for providing your Gaming Pro Carbon Wi-Fi. Of course, using the AMD Zen 2 chipset, the X570, and that's what unleashes that Gen 4 speeds for PCIe drives like this one. So I'm very excited to be featuring that here in this video. We also have a cool white-on-white fan for the back of this case from Arctic. Thank you very much, Arctic. And then we're going to be using a Ryzen 7 3700X processor for this build. That's a great high-end processor from AMD. It's really your only choice at its price point. It's an awesome, awesome offering from AMD. Now, for the video card, I'm using an EVGA GeForce RTX 2080 Ti Black, because that's what I had in my collection. That's typically around $1,100, and frankly, it's almost impossible to get that video card anymore. 2080 Ti's are actually going up in price. The selection is dropping. I don't know what's going on, but I have that in my collection, so I'm going to show you that in this build just to show you how you install it. But the tips I'll give you for installing that card are going to be pretty similar for any other card. Now, all told, all the components you see on the bench here today come out to $2,300. But if you went with a more mainstream video card like an RTX 2070 Super from NVIDIA, you drop $600 off that price. So you'd be looking at more like $1,700, under $1,700 for everything you see on this bench. And I promise you, this is going to look super primo. In white on white, it's going to look like more than 1,700 bucks. And that's why I really wanted to showcase these special components from Corsair and Arctic that are in white. Just for like a couple bucks more, you get a white finish, and it really makes your system kind of stand out and really look like a showpiece. So I'm very excited to be showing you what these look like and kind of the options you have if you want something other than your standard black build. Or, you know, a lot of people of course use RGB, and this case does have RGB lighting, but not everyone just wants flashy lights. Some people want, you know, a little bit of a premium look, and I think you'll have that with everything assembled here. So without further ado, let me crack open some of these boxes, show you what we've got inside, and then get into the process of building this awesome gaming PC for 2020. I will catch you in a second. So as always, I start my builds with the power supply. I have the RM850X here from Corsair, nicely packaged as always. It's a good looking power supply. It has that black grille on the white case. I do wish the fan blades were black, that would top it all off, but overall a pretty good looking power supply. Now it comes with a lot of modular cables, and luckily most of the ones in this bag will be able to put right back in the box. I'm going to show you what we're going to be using with this power supply in a moment, but I should note that actually in my build I'm going to be using these premium individually sleeved cables, which give it a little bit more of a custom look. But turning back to what actually comes with the power supply, they are all going to match up with the modular jacks on the back of the unit. And luckily, we're going to be getting rid of a lot of these. We don't need to use these, like these Molex or peripheral connectors. Those all go back in the bag, thank goodness. They are obsolete, you probably won't need them. But you probably will need a SATA connector. And these are very easily identified by the flat connector type. They're very unlike any others, and I'm using them to power the lighting on this system. Here's that big 24-pin motherboard cable. This, of course, is going to be used in every build. And then we have our PCIe cables. Now, these are often referred to as VGA by some manufacturers. And of course, what they're used for is your video card. Note that they come split as a 6+2-pin connector, but most modern video cards need this 8-pin connector. So you'll just have to figure out how those two ends go together. Some video cards will actually need an 8+6, and some will need an 8+8, like my 2080 Ti. Moving on to the CPU cables, luckily I do have two, and that is necessary for any X570 build. Note that these cables are actually split as well. They are 4+4 pin technically, and you can pull them apart and put them together based on the needs of your motherboard. My motherboard needs an 8 and a 4. Now, I might be tempted to push my power supply in here and screw it down and then deal with the cables, but then I'll have no access to these modular jacks. So we do have to cable it up before it goes in the system. Here's my SATA cable going in, then I'll plug in that big 24-pin motherboard cable. Note that different manufacturers split this cable in different ways, so this is unique to Corsair. Also unique to Corsair is the fact that its PCIe and CPU cables can all be connected to the same jacks here. So any of these 8-pin jacks can be used for either the CPU or the PCIe. It's a little bit confusing the way it's labeled. I'd love to see kind of a line here that shows you which ones are actually for those cables. I'm going to go ahead and use most of those, and then it's time to put my power supply in, but I note that I don't think there's going to be enough room for all these cables even when I unbundle them, and I'm going to have to remove this hard drive tray. So hopefully in your build like mine, I don't need that hard drive tray and I can just get this power supply in. And make sure that you orient the fan the appropriate way. You can see there's a vent at the bottom of this chassis, and I'm going to make sure my fan is pointing down so it can breathe through that vent. I go ahead and use the screws that come with the power supply, and make sure when you're doing this that you're actually affixing the screws through screw holes rather than vent holes, because it may seem that you can put it in any of the holes here, but actually only 4 will work depending on the orientation of your power supply. Now I've got my cables here, and remember, I'm using these custom individually sleeved cables. They look really nice, but they are actually a little bit bulky. I'm going to try to start feeding them through into the front portion of the case. There's my VGA cable. Then I have this bulky motherboard cable. Then I'll turn to the dual CPU cables. Keep in mind, I do need 2 of these, and my premium kit only came with 1. So these are not matched cables, but they'll both work, of course. I feed them through this hole up here at the top corner of the case. It's a little bit of a tight fit, but they do make it in. All right, I've got the power supply mounted inside the case. I've got the individually sleeved cables attached, and now it's actually time to deal with this motherboard here and show you how I install the CPU, the RAM, the heatsink, and the solid state drive, which I've got over there. Now, to show you all this up close and personal, Corsair has actually come through with yet another piece of great hardware. But this isn't hardware that you put inside your case. It is the Elgato multi-mount, which I'm showing you right here. This is a camera mount designed for streamers and creators so that you can get your camera into just about any position you want it to be in. And what I'm going to be trying to do is going to give you the first-person view of me working with my hands on the motherboard. So let me open up the box on this MSI X570 board, and first step will be to pop in the CPU. So here's a quick lay of the land view of the X570 Gaming Pro Carbon Wi-Fi from MSI. Here you have dual M.2 slots plus the zero frozer fan. I really like this feature. Basically, it doesn't spin it unless the system needs the cooling, which means it stays silent otherwise. Now let's take a look at the socket, noting that it is rotated 90 degrees. It's a little bit confusing. You might think you put your Ryzen processor in with the text the right way, but that is incorrect. So let's open up the locking lever here and put the CPU in the correct way. Note that the pins are actually quite durable. You can touch them and not bend them, and that's quite different from Intel's pins, which are notoriously fragile. So now I'm going to lower the Ryzen processor into position, keeping in mind that it is indeed rotated 90 degrees. It goes in very smoothly and easily, and then I lower the locking lever. It takes very little effort, unlike Intel's, which always feels like you're smashing your CPU. Now let's move on to the M.2 drive. It can be a little confusing to know where to place your M.2 drive because there are two slots. Here's the lower one, which is actually a little bit more accessible, but I want to use the upper one because that's the one that communicates directly with the CPU. Note that there are 3 screws on this motherboard for me to remove this heat shield and gain access to the slot. It is connected to this main cooling system, which is nice. And then when I reveal the M.2 slot, I see the slot itself and I see 2 mounting screws. This is kind of a mistake on MSI's part because if I attempted to lower my SSD into position, it would actually be striking the first of the 2 screws. This is the screw I need, and this is a screw I don't need. So I take it out. That's for very, very rare 60mm long M.2 drives. So now I'm going to drop this Corsair drive into position, but now I have another problem. The heat shield that comes with the MSI board has an affixed screw that cannot be removed, so I actually removed the heatsink from the Corsair drive. Of course, keep it on if your system doesn't have its own M.2 cooling system because this is a very hot running M.2 drive. It's a Gen 4 drive. Notice it uses a Ryzen controller, so you may wonder if I've switched it out. No, indeed, it is still an MP600. Then I remove the protective film from the thermal tape attached to the M.2 shield and lower it into position, remembering to affix the 3 screws to make sure it makes good contact with the full cooling system. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the RAM. There are, of course, 4 RAM slots. You're going to want to use the 2nd and 4th slot if you have 2 RAM sticks. Make sure to unlock the locks before inserting the RAM. And note the direction of the RAM. It is not symmetrical. That slot is actually not halfway in between, as you can see here as I put these back to back. Make sure you line it up with the tab inside the slot. And then push down on both sides evenly so that it snaps in. The biggest cause of a system not booting is having your RAM not fully inserted. All right, at this point I have my M.2 drive installed, I have my CPU locked in, I've got my RAM sticks in. That means it's time to install the CPU cooler, and for my Arctic freezer cooler, I need to remove these factory installed AMD brackets. I'll be replacing them with those white brackets, and I'll be using MX4 thermal compound on this cooler. Arctic scores its standoffs to indicate which socket it's for, and the single score is for the AMD socket I'm using, so I'm going to screw those in here. This can be done by hand, no need for a wrench. And then it's time to install those white brackets I talked to you about. That actually requires removing the fans that are pre-installed from the factory. And here are the white brackets. I screw each one on with a single screw. One on the front, one on the back. Quite simple. And now it's time to turn to the thermal paste. Of course, I need to peel off this protective cover, revealing the direct touch heat pipes. There are 4 of them. And while the cooler does come with this packet of MX4, I highly recommend you pick up a syringe like this. It makes it much easier to apply. I do need to put it on all 4 of these direct touch heat pipes. Only coolers with a single flat transfer plate can use the more traditional method of a piece-sized drop on the CPU itself. Now I've lowered the CPU cooler into position on top of the CPU and I will tighten it down. But note that I don't want to tighten down one screw all the way. I want to go around diagonally and equalize the tension across the cooler. So I'll give each screw a few turns and then go on to the next one until I have equalized the tension across the transfer plate. Now it's time to reattach the fans, and I want to give you a tip here in terms of the airflow direction. The airflow always goes from the hub to the frame. So the frame is always the back of the fan. This is the back here. That's where the air exits. So when mounting the fan to the cooler, I do want to see that hub, that spinning hub on the front. That means the air is going to be blowing through the cooler. And then the second fan on the rear will have that frame facing the back of the chassis. Now I'm ready to connect the fans to the motherboard, and Arctic makes it really simple because each fan actually has its own PWM splitter. That means I can choose one of these fans as the lead fan and then plug the second fan into that first fan splitter, then plug the first fan into the CPU fan header on the motherboard, tuck the cables away, and we are done. I've now lowered the motherboard into position on the motherboard standoffs. Note that the middle standoff that Corsair has used in the case is a centering standoff, and it uses a smaller screw, so I need to get my smaller screwdriver out. For the other 8 screws around the edges of the board, you use a standard number 2 Phillips screwdriver. The next step is to connect the front panel cables, and I'm using this front panel extension kit from Corsair that will dress up the interior of the system. You'll also be connecting all of your motherboard cables, and don't forget that with all X570 motherboards, you need 2 CPU cables. I have one already connected. I'm going to connect the other one into the 4-pin header now. So now I have an 8-pin and 4-pin connected. This ensures that full power is provided to the CPU no matter how many cores you're running. Now I have to admit that with the use of those individually sleeved cables plus the extension kits, there's a lot of cabling back here and it's quite a mess, so I'm just going to close up that panel and forget about it. Turning back to the main compartment, it's time to install these white Arctic fans. The clear bladed fan is from Arctic's PST series, which means it has a PWM splitter included, just like the fans we saw on the cooler itself. So I connected the white fan to the clear fan and will then connect the clear fan to the motherboard. Securing both fans is quite simple. There's plenty of space in this case, and when I'm done, I affix the magnetic dust filter that's included with the 465X case. Just one step left, but it's a fun one, dropping the GPU into place. First, locking into the PCI slot, then affix the 2 screws to the back of the case, and then connect the power cables, making sure that you match the number of cables to the number of ports on the GPU. My 2080 Ti requires dual 8-pin connectors, and no, it will not boot if you don't use all of the required cables. Make sure they are fully seated and locked in, and of course I have these decorative individually sleeved cables, which I'm going to dress up a little bit with those cable combs set in place, and we are done. There's nothing left to do but press that power button and see this system come to life in full effect. We've got plenty of RGB, we've got the fan spinning. The overall effect I think is really great. I love the white on white look. Those LL120 fans in the front give it a lot of character, and then we have these white extension cables for both the power supply and front panel. I really love the Arctic white on white cooler, those white fans, and the RGB effects of the motherboard, the Vengeance RGB Pro RAM, and of course the case itself. I think the overall look is really unique and something you can achieve at home without spending a ton of money. All right, the build is complete. You've seen it from start to finish, inside and out, and I hope you'll agree that it really stands out from the pack. This white on white build for 2020 using AMD components and an RTX 2080 Ti graphics card looks like $1,000,000. From my point of view, it's actually a work of art, and it really shows you kind of the benefit of color coordinating your system to make it really something special and unique. Look, you don't buy a couch just based on its specifications, do you? You don't buy a car just based on its specifications. looks matter. And I think in this case, we've seen a system come together that really looks fantastic and doesn't cost all that much more than a really boring looking gaming PC. And the key is, again, the color coordination. I love the RGB effects, but I particularly love the white on white effect here. And I want to thank my sponsors for coming up with components that really stood out from the pack. We have Arctic with its Freezer 34 Duo in a white on white motif. Again, they also provided white fans, so check them out. They have a whole lineup of great white accessories. Then we have the MSI X570 Gaming Pro Carbon. While it's not in white, it has a really cool carbon effect to its aesthetics. I think it looks really cool, and of course it also has the Mystic Light RGB effects to add on to the system. Finally, last but not least, we have Corsair, which came through in a huge way, starting with this beautiful Vengeance RGB Pro kit. I love this white RAM kit, and the RGB effects are really second to none. It's the best looking RAM kit on the market, and I do mean that. I think it looks better than the more expensive Dominator Platinum RGB from Corsair. Then we have the 465X, which speaks for itself here. It's a beautiful case, dual glass panels, those LL120 fans in front. Corsair is really kind of pushing the boundaries of RGB effects. It allows you to do a lot of things, and that's all through the iCUE software, and that's why it's in the name of the case, the iCUE 465X. Corsair, of course, also came through with its white cables, both its power supply extension cables and its front panel extension cables. These look really, really good. So check them out if you want that custom look for your PC. And then finally, they did behind the scenes, you can't see it, the white power supply, the 850X. That's pretty unique on the market. It's very hard to find any other white power supplies. And while it is hidden, it actually comes with white cables. So if you don't want to invest in the separate accessory, the power supply cables in white, you actually get pretty nice looking white cables with the 850X, and that alone is, I think, worth the price of admission for that power supply. So again, thanks to all my sponsors for helping this video come together. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments or questions, please post them down below. And if you like this video, of course, please do like and subscribe, and I will catch you soon.